so many people remarry for the wrong reasons. For example, I hear all the time people get married because for revenge. What a terrible reason to get married again. The ex-husband married his girlfriend, now he's happily married, I'm going to get married and show him. People get married because they think there's an expiration date on their forehead like a milk carton in the supermarket. If I don't get married again, my window's closing.
You see those people in the office later on, the ones who didn't. It wasn't quite happily ever after the first time. You got a divorce. But if you're like a lot of people, you're ready to jump back in for marriage number 2 or more. But before you do, you should listen to my guest today. Family law attorney Benjamin Berkley is here. His book is Before You Say I Do Again, A Buyer's Beware Guide to Remarriage. Great to have you here today, Benjamin.
Thanks, Greg.
So you would think people who've been married once would know better, but they turn around and make a lot of the same mistakes all over again?
It's like riding a bicycle, falling, breaking your arm, getting back on. You know, they make the same mistakes over and over and over again.
So should we give them credit for trying again?
We give them some credit, but you would think they would learn.
So what are the common mistakes that people make the second time around?
Problem is people get into a comfort level. They had a first relationship, they like things, even though things were not going the way they wanted. Then they get divorced because things were now not working out at all. But they find someone who is very similar to that first marriage, which they said they would never go back to. But here they are again, walking down that aisle, and I say not walking, rushing, running down that aisle.
And the statistics are kind of scary because even though a lot of first marriages fail, second marriages fail at an even higher rate and faster.
When everything is going great, first marriages fail at the rate of 50%. Second marriages, 70% or more.
70%. And how long do they last usually?
Males who remarry for about 5 to 6 years. Women, second marriages, less than 5 years.
Less than 5 years. So, since you've worked with so many people over the years, well, I should say, by the way, you're married.
I am married.
And you've been married how long?
35 years.
35 years. Okay, you're still on number 1, so that's good.
I am.
But you wrote the book because you're a family law attorney and you see these people all the time coming into your office.
I wrote the book because I started seeing patterns, and I'm sure you probably had the same experience as me. Have you ever been to a wedding and the flowers are beautiful and the music starts up, and as the bride and groom start to pass you say, now wait a minute, that's not going to work. What do you and I know that they don't know? It's because love is blind and they're running to that altar without seeing all the red flags.
Well, you said one of the big mistakes people make is that they don't really look at what went wrong in their first marriage.
Yeah, exactly. They don't take inventory of what went wrong, and then when they are divorced, they feel, oh, I need to get back on the bandwagon and get remarried again. And so many people remarry for the wrong reasons. For example, I hear all the time people get married because for revenge. What a terrible reason to get married again. The ex-husband married his girlfriend, now he's happily married, I'm going to get married and show him revenge. People get married because they think there's an expiration date on their forehead like a milk carton in the supermarket. If I don't get married again, my window's closing. I better do it. People get married because, as we know in our society, 1 is the loneliest number. Who wants to go to a nice restaurant, table for 1? Who wants to walk up to the movie ticket window, table for 1? Go on a cruise, based on 2 in a cabin. 1 is the loneliest number, but that's not the reason why you should be married.
Well, I think you say in the book a lot of people, you know, it's like not Mr. Right or Mrs. Right, it's Mr. Right Now or Mrs. Right Now.
Exactly, exactly.
But I think you're right about that. I mean, a lot of people, I think, are just scared to be lonely or by themselves, and so they'll just marry the first thing that comes along.
Yeah, unfortunately, and then they pay the price later.
Well, so how do you we were talking about, you know, the way when people get married, well, there tends to be finger pointing. Like I said, they're not going to say, what did I do wrong? It's always, you know, what did you do wrong? Or what did she do wrong? You know, that so-and-so.
Right.
How do you get beyond that?
Right.
How do you...
I tell my clients, before you can consider remarrying, you need to take inventory of yourself. And there's 3 important areas you have to consider. Are you emotionally ready to remarry? Are you legally ready to remarry? Are you financially ready to remarry? And I go through that in my book. Very specifically, let's talk about financial.
Sure.
Let's say a person is receiving support, alimony. Now if they remarry, that alimony ends. Let's say they're receiving Social Security benefits because maybe they're a widow. That Social Security benefits end. So don't think that you can get married again and not consider what your financial needs are. What if you have children? There's child support, Maybe your new husband, you're going to have to relocate. That's going to be a consideration for your children. Finances is a very, very big consideration.
Well, it doesn't sound very romantic.
It isn't romantic, but it's a fact of life. You're going to be married to this person for hopefully the rest of your life. All these things have to be considered. Emotionally, I mentioned earlier, people get married for revenge. People get married because they feel they need to. But there's a lot of people who are not ready for remarriage. I have had clients who come into my office who are still wearing their wedding band from their first marriage, and they're saying they're getting remarried. I said, wait a minute, in your mind, you're still married to that first person. They haven't gotten over it.
So in fact, I think you even have kind of a checklist of things that indicate, when do you know you are ready for marriage or when you aren't? There were some things, I think wearing a wedding ring is probably one of them.
Right.
Are there other things that
when you're starting to feel independent, you're no longer involved in his life, it's your life. You have your own circle of friends. You have gained your own independence and you're ready to move on. It takes a long time. It's not something that you enter a marriage today, you leave that marriage tomorrow, and you're ready for the next marriage the day after. There's no timetable. Everyone has their own timetable when it's going to be right for that person. But you have to be emotionally, legally, financially ready for remarriage.
Do you think, though, that, okay, so it may be different in every situation, but is there a rule of thumb? I mean, you hear about people, even let's say if the spouse dies and then somebody marries, really soon after, which makes you wonder. But I mean, how, you think, is there a rule of thumb of how soon is too soon, or is it really just?
It really is up to that person, but a lot also depends on age. Loneliness is terrible, right? A person who has a spouse, long-term marriage, and all of a sudden that spouse passes away, the whole world's going to frown. How could you think of dating again? You loved your husband, you were together, you were inseparable, but no one wants to be alone. Likewise, if you had a very short-term marriage and there were no children, no property, whatever, maybe it's a little sooner than other marriages, and you can go ahead and move on with that. But I don't think there's any hard, fast rule regarding that.
Well, I want to go back to when you were talking about, kind of taking stock of what went wrong in the first marriage, because I agree with you. I think a lot of people don't really do that. What are some of the things that people do to sabotage their marriages, whether or not they're aware of it? What kinds of behaviors do you see?
People sometimes marry from what they saw from their parents, yet that becomes their comfort level. I had a client who was on her fourth marriage, and all four of her spouses had drinking problems. They were addicted to alcohol. And she had a father who was abusive and drinking to alcohol. But that's what she became accustomed to. That's what she learned to be acceptable.
They want somebody like dear old dad, even if he was an alcoholic.
And then she complains to me that her fourth marriage isn't working because he's a drinking problem. I said, well, what about the other three? And that was the same thing you said about them. So one of the warning signs are addictive behavior, whether it's gambling, whether it's drinking, whether it's credit card debt. There's so many things that you need to open your eyes. And I talk a lot about listening to the voices of public opinion. What you and I know, we need to tell this person before they get too far.
When do you listen and when don't you? Because, there's a tendency, I think you even say in the book, that, people could be jealous. I mean, they may have an agenda, a reason, especially if they're family or friends. So when do you listen and when do you not listen?
Well, I don't think anyone appreciates unsolicited advice, especially when you tell this person, I met this unbelievable guy, he's wonderful, he takes me here, we're going to have a wonderful life together, and then you want to raise your hand and say, but, you know what I know about him. But when that relationship turns serious, if you're a good friend, if you're sincerely a good friend, I think a friend owes that friend to tell them exactly what they feel, with the chance that you may lose your friendship. But I think in the long run, you're doing something really good by telling them your opinion.
We'll be right back with Ben Berkley. His book is Before You Say I Do Again, A Buyer's Beware Guide to Remarriage. And we are back with Ben Berkley. His book is Before You Say I Do Again, A Buyer's Beware Guide to Remarriage. Well, you say that men and women do a lot of the same dumb things when it comes to marriage and remarriage. But you do say, though, that some things apply to women in particular. For instance, you mentioned they think the guy's going to change.
I have not changed in 35 years, but my wife is still thinking I'm going to change. I have my favorite shirt. I'm not going to throw my shirt out. We go to dinner, I order what I want to order, and she'll say to me, you won't like that. How do you know I won't like it? I ordered it. And then when I finished my plate, she said, I know you didn't like it. No, I did like it. But I think that's the way women are wired. They want to try to change the person they're living with, and that's a losing battle.
Oh, I had to applaud when I read that chapter, because I really feel, I've said that I've seen people even like in dating and stuff where, I think, you know, your guys don't change, okay? I mean, he said it, I've said it, guys don't change. I mean, it's so true. And people, and that's the problem though, instead of marrying the person, you're trying to marry the person you're going to change them into, not the person they are.
Which is a terrible mistake.
And when you talk about compatibility, so there's really not even a basic compatibility to begin with, because you're marrying, so, but people do that a lot.
Yeah, for example, I cannot wrap a present for a gift. My wife can wrap beautiful boxes. I can't. My brain does not think that. And she says to me, why can't you even pick out a birthday card? I don't know. Birthday card. Here it is. Sounds nice. Goodbye. It doesn't take me a half hour to look at all the cards in the Hallmark card shop. Women don't like that. They internalize, they dwell on these things, and they think that the person they meet, oh, he's my next challenge. I'm going to make him change. It's not going to work.
Well, along that line, you talk about kind of taking it for a test ride, or taking a look under the hood, or giving a kick under the, what's your phrase?
Part 2 of the book is called Kick the Tires and Check Under the Hood. So after you are emotionally, legally, and financially ready to say, I do again, now you got to question whether the person you're about to say I do again to is ready. And unlike that flat screen TV that you bought this past weekend at Best Buy and you don't like it, you can't return it. This is a contract. It's buyers beware. So when I talk about kick the tires, you need to look at his personal, physical, and mental health. And that extends to his family. As far as physical, I mean, are there any health issues? It sounds cruel. Maybe you're going to have children. Is there anything hereditary that can be passed on to the next generation? I know it's terrible to talk about things like that, but it's a big consideration.
Because you see those people in the office later on, the ones who didn't talk about it?
Exactly. Mental issues. Does he have an addictive behavior? Are there mental issues in his family? Is he abusive? Was his family abusive? Do you want to become now part of an abusive relationship? You also have to consider his financial well-being. I'll never forget, a lady came to my office crying. She was only married for a couple of months. At her wedding, at the reception, the husband was served with a lawsuit from a credit card company who had been looking for this man. She then discovered he had thousands of debts owed to credit card companies. She was clueless because she was blinded by love. One of the things I
guess that marriage didn't last.
It did not last. It did not last. If you're going with a guy and there's unopened mail in his apartment, or you see letters from collection agencies, or he doesn't answer his phone because creditors are calling, that's a warning sign. You need to open your eyes, see what's going on.
Well, when you talk about, I mean, there are a whole list of things that people do. When you talk about credit checks and that sort of thing, to really, you know, there are different ways to look into people's backgrounds and things. Again, that's kind of dicey because some people might just be pissed off. I mean, truthfully, I probably wouldn't be very happy if I found out you like hired a detective to follow me around or something.
It's surely not romantic.
So what level do you take it, and what reaction do people have? Does it break up some marriages because people do too much checking?
Sure it does. But then again, if that is what caused the breakup of the marriage, it wasn't meant to happen in the first place. There has to be trust. If I was to question the person I was going out with, you know, about all the bills you have, and I see that these creditors keep calling you, and the reaction I got was, well, all of a sudden I'm being put on the defensive. Well, maybe I need to think this through a little better than that. Do I want to inherit debt? I want to marry this person because I love this person, have a wonderful life together, not spend the rest of my life bailing him out and going to court.
Well, you know, I hate to say it, but it's almost a little depressing when you read this kind of a book, because I mean, I like it because I think it's very realistic. But you know, in a way, people are, I still think in our society, although marriage is on the decline, I think statistically, but people still have this idea, you know, you got to get married. So everybody wants to rush off and get married. But then what? You know, then you're married and you have to deal with it. And it seems like the happily ever after stories are kind of few and far between, which is kind of depressing. Yeah,
depressing, very, very sad, but that's, you know, the real world. We don't live in a fairy tale world. After the wedding and after the honeymoon, now we're settling down and you have the everyday problems that any husband and wife face. You want to try to make those problems smaller than larger, and the way of doing that is looking for the red flags before you enter the relationship.
So how do you do that, though? I think that's probably one of the keys, and if you've had a 30-year marriage, that you've learned how to, because in other words, you know, maybe you use the phrase as, you know when to pick your battles, but Again, that's kind of something that you and your wife, I imagine, have figured out how to stay in a marriage and keep a marriage going.
Well,
but a lot of people don't, you know, so how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing is communication. It has to be open communication. It can't be any deception. It can't be I'm going out for an hour and you don't say where you're going. Likewise, never go to sleep in a fight. Never. Now, you may wake up the next morning, had a great dream, and you don't remember why you went to bed in a fight, but if you start off the night in a fight, chances are the next morning it's not going to be good.
So you never, after all those years, you always...
Never go to sleep in a fight. Never. Always resolve whatever your differences are.
Now, is there the problem too that, you know, in the beginning, of course, I imagine if there's still that, you know, intensity or that, you know, starry-eyed look, but for the long run, I mean, you know, you can't, I mean, once you get to know people, I mean, it may be at a comfort level in a good way, but yet, you know, some of the, I don't say the magic is not, but you know what I mean,
it's not a honeymoon every day.
Right, the honeymoon's over, but you know, the marriage isn't. But there is a way to keep it going even after that, though. But apparently a lot of people maybe bail as soon as the honeymoon's over.
A lot of people at first see a problem and they bury it under the carpet. Shove it under the carpet, think it's going to go away. It's not going to go away. It's going to fester. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse. If you have problems with your wife's parents this holiday, next holiday is going to be worse. If you say, I don't want to see them this Thanksgiving, what do you think is going to happen next Thanksgiving when you say, let's see my parents? If you have religious issues, you had the religious issues before you got married, they're not going away just because you are married. These are things people need to talk about, and unfortunately, they get too caught up in ordering the wedding invitations and picking out the band and the hotel and the honeymoon than what they really need to be thinking about.
Well, if you ever follow any of the celebrity gossip, indeed. I won't even go there because I think just there are enough real life examples. But I also loved a part of the book where you talk about, very interesting, you ask people or clients, whatever, friends, everybody, I guess, what qualities attracted them to their mate or spouse or whatever the case may be. And a lot of times it was those very qualities that led to the divorce.
Exactly. Someone who seems to be in control, and that's what she was so impressed with. The marriage broke up because he was too dominating. Another person who seemed very, very sensitive to her needs, the marriage broke up because in her eyes he was now a weak person. So there's subtle differences between those.
So how do you, well, what does that say? I mean, how can, you know, something that seems so appealing in the beginning, is it that people just don't know themselves? Or maybe they don't know the other person, they don't even know themselves, what they really are looking for, or what?
That's a good analysis. They're not sure what they're looking for. And at the same time, they're getting caught up in, as I say, blinded by love and not asking all the right questions.
We'll be right back with Ben Berkley. His book is Before You Say I Do Again. And we are back with Ben Berkley. His book is Before You Say I Do Again, A Buyer's Beware Guide to Remarriage. Well, I love one quote you say in the book, or one of the chapter headings, whatever, is, should I open a restaurant or should I remarry? Because the restaurant business is a terrible business.
It's a terrible business because statistics that you're going to fail, but remarriage is fail at an even greater statistic.
I'll just start open a restaurant, I think, you know.
At least you won't go hungry.
Yeah, you know. But to get to the attorney side of it, well, another thing I love is the fact that, you know, there's a way a psychologist or a lot of people would approach this, but you really are there in the trenches as a divorce attorney. And I like the fact that you're trying to help people with this. And are there ever times when people come in and you tell them, you know, that it's when do you know you should get a divorce and when are you just having some tough times?
When someone says to me they want a divorce, my first reaction is, does your spouse know? And if they say to me, no, I haven't talked about it, and I say, well, I think you need to talk about it. I'm the enemy. Once your husband knows that you're going to be filing for the divorce, I'm the enemy. He's not going to like me. If your divorce is going to end, you want it to be amicable. Sure, I get wealthy if it's contested. The more protracted litigation, the more attorney's fees I can bill. But that's not really our goal here. Our goal is to first try to save your marriage, if there's something to save. If not, keep communicating, try to work out your differences so that most of the issues can be resolved and the attorneys can do their paperwork and then you go on with your life and not having the terrible scars from your divorce.
What percentage of the time when people come in to see you, do you think, at least in your own mind, whether or not they follow your advice, how often do you think the marriage can actually be saved?
It depends on the length of the marriage. It depends if there's children. Obviously, if there's children, there's more of an emphasis on the marriage to try and save it. If it was a short-term marriage, no property, no debts, nothing really to dissolve, they just want to move on, and those marriages are going to probably end up in a divorce a lot sooner than the ones with children. Children is a big, big issue, especially when you have custody rights to work out, visitation rights to work out, and the hardest thing that I see, the most terrible thing I see, is where parents use children as pawns.
Oh, yes.
They're innocent. Just because mom and dad are not getting along doesn't mean that the children should be used by one side or the other.
Oh, we've done whole shows on parental alienation, so I have some sense of what you're talking about. I've heard so many horror stories. But also, though, I like the fact, though, that you say, though, that parents should not stay together for the kids in some cases, because a lot of people have this thing they're going to stay together for the kids, but as you say, sometimes that's the worst thing.
Absolutely not, because it's wrong for the children. Well, what child wants to be in an environment where mommy and daddy are fighting every single night?
Exactly. And listen to this guy.
And their whole life, they go to bed every night, they hear screams from mom and dad. That's not a very good environment for a child.
Right.
Wrong reason to stay together.
Yeah, the idea that you just stay married no matter what, which maybe has religious implications.
Exactly.
I don't know,
but if you do reach that point where the divorce is going to be over, aside from the divorce paperwork, before you consider remarry, you need to consider what you need to do legally. And one of the things I mentioned in the book is you should have a will. And especially if you have children, you need to have a will with a guardianship clause. God forbid something happens to you tomorrow, you want someone named in your will who's going to raise your children. And people right away think, well, I'm divorced, the child's going to go to my ex-husband. Not necessarily true. If you put in writing someone else and you have good reasons to back it up, and it turns out that the father was not the person who's in the best interest of the children, the court will consider whether or not the child goes to the father or not.
Well, I was surprised even when you mentioned matters of inheritance, let alone custody, but in some cases the kids got shut out entirely because of either the will or the lack of the will. Can you explain, some of the inheritance issues too?
Yeah, not every state has the same inheritance rights as here we are in California. That's why you want a will which specifies who you want to inherit from your estate, and not allow the court's laws to dictate how inheritance was to go.
Because there are cases where if someone gets divorced and then remarried, the new wife may get everything, but the kids from the previous marriage may not get anything.
Exactly, exactly. Or the reason why you want a will in some states, just because you are divorced doesn't mean that your ex-spouse doesn't still have rights. For example, in the state of New York, if you name your spouse on a life insurance policy, get divorced, and pass away, that ex-spouse is still going to be the beneficiary of the life insurance policy, even though you're divorced. Because it's what the policy states as the beneficiary, not the fact that you were divorced.
Well, prenuptial is another legal side of it that has kind of a negative connotation in some ways popularly, because again, it doesn't seem very romantic.
It's not romantic, it's a piece of paper, it's a contract, and basically people view it as saying like, oh, I already know the marriage is going to fail, and this is what's going to be the result if it does fail. Why would I want to sign this?
Does it put baggage over the marriage, do you think, or is it just basic protection?
I think it's basic protection, especially when you have a second marriage where people have acquired property before the marriage, whether it's a home, it's a business. You've worked hard to earn your business, to build up equity in your home. All of a sudden, you don't want this marriage to now take away everything you worked so hard to strive for. And I think if people go into the marriage understanding that, yeah, it's a business, yes, it's unromantic, but let's sign this, put it away, never think about it again, it's going to avoid the issues in the future.
How often is it actually a relationship killer? I mean, have you seen where, somebody raised the prenuptial word and that was the end of it?
Yeah, very small percentage.
Well, you don't really love me.
Very, very small percentage.
Oh, really? Okay. So most of the time they do sit down and work it out. And as you said, though, I mean, especially with multiple marriages, let alone we haven't gotten into the more extreme cases, but then you really do have all different kinds of probably property and kids and custody issues and stuff that you probably would need a team of lawyers to work out by the time you...
Look, a marriage is a partnership. When you end the marriage, you're dividing up, breaking up the partnership. If you have no piece of paper to start with, the courts are scrambling to find out who's who. When you have the prenuptial agreement, it sets up the groundwork.
You talk about one reason that maybe that people are more likely to, that the more times you get married, it seems like the less successful those marriages are. But one thing you say is, though, that first divorce is kind of a barrier, and once you break that, because it's not an easy thing to do. So is that, I mean, once you've gone down that path, it's easier the second time. And then also maybe too, maybe just you kind of figure where it's going, maybe because you keep marrying the same person over and over again. So instead of putting up 2 years of crap, after like 6 months, you think, I'm out of here.
That's why the second marriage is even shorter than the first. And as I say in my book, there's 3 rings of marriage. There's the engagement ring, the wedding ring, and the suffering. You don't want that 3rd ring.
And some people just go right to the suffering.
Unfortunately.
But yet it's fascinating or interesting. Well, do you know what percentage of people have multiple, like 3 or more? Or, I mean, I know it's, what percentage of society has been married that many times?
I don't know what percentage of society, but I can tell you that the statistics of people who remarry their exes is off the charts. Which is to me so...
There's that movie that's out there, right, about it's complicated.
It's complicated.
So what do you think about that?
This is Hollywood. People make movies. How many times has a sequel been better than the original? Not too often.
Right.
Why would you want to get back with what was so horrible the first time? It's mind-boggling to me.
And those marriages don't really work out any better than a marriage, second marriage to a fresh person, or are they even worse?
The last statistic I saw is the failure rate is over 90%.
90%.
Remarry their ex.
So what are they thinking?
What are they thinking? They took out the garbage. You don't bring the garbage back in.
I mean, on one hand, like I say, you know, when I say this is partly depressing, I'm thinking, you know, is it a good thing that like hope springs eternal and people just have these fantasies that somehow it's going to work out, or are they just clueless?
Many times they are clueless, or living in this fairy tale world.
Well, we are almost out of time, but in our final minute, what piece of advice, you know, having had a long marriage yourself, having counseled, you know, gone through a million divorces, written a book, what would you tell people? I would simply tell people, don't get bogged down by minor issues, because minor issues become major issues. Smile, attack it with a good sense of humor. Put a spin on it. There's a way of making a bad situation into a good situation. And don't let anything fester. Attack it today, because it's going to come right back and hit you tomorrow. And we'll see you in court. Thank you very much. Thanks, Benjamin Berkley. His book is Before You Say I Do Again, A Buyer's Beware Guide to Remarriage. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.